The first time it happened, Daniel almost didn't notice. It was just another cold morning in Chicago. The kind where the wind cuts through your coat and the sky feels permanently gray. Daniel stood in line at his usual coffee shop, half awake, scrolling through emails he didn't care about, already late for a job he barely tolerated. Life had become a routine of quiet exhaustion. When he reached the counter and pulled out his wallet, the barista smiled and said, "You're all set. The person before you already paid for your coffee." Daniel blinked. "Wait, what?" They said, "Tell him to have a better day." And just like that, something shifted. Before we continue, if stories like this touch your heart, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps this channel reach more people who might need a little reminder that kindness still exists in the world. Daniel walked out of the shop holding his coffee a little tighter than usual. He glanced around, trying to figure out who might have paid for it. But the street was busy, people rushing past each other, lost in their own worlds. Whoever it was, they were already gone. At first, he shrugged it off. Just a random act, he muttered. But as he walked to work, something kept tugging at him. That simple gesture, just a few dollars, had done something strange. It didn't change his life, but it changed his mood. The day didn't feel as heavy anymore. For the first time in weeks, he noticed things. A dog wagging its tail. A kid laughing while chasing pigeons. The smell of fresh bread from a bakery he'd passed 100 times but never really smelled. And then, without overthinking it, Daniel did something he hadn't planned. The next morning, he went back to the same coffee shop. When he reached the counter, he said, "I'll take my usual, and whatever the next person orders." The barista raised an eyebrow. "Paying it forward?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Yeah. I guess I am." The next person in line was a young woman juggling a toddler on her hip and a diaper bag slipping off her shoulder. She looked exhausted. When the barista told her her order was already paid for, her face froze in confusion, then softened into something Daniel recognized. Relief. Gratitude. Maybe even a little hope. Daniel didn't stick around to be thanked. He just walked out, feeling something unfamiliar. Light. Days turned into weeks. Daniel didn't make it a big deal. He didn't tell anyone. But every now and then, he'd pay for someone's coffee. Sometimes it was a construction worker. Sometimes a student buried in books. Once, it was an elderly man who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. And every time, Daniel noticed the same thing. It mattered. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Not in a way that made headlines. But in those quiet, human moments, the kind that most people overlook, it mattered more than anything. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, Daniel stopped by the coffee shop again. He looked tired, more than usual. His boss had yelled at him. A project had failed. And to make things worse, he'd just found out his rent was going up. He stood in line, staring at the floor, feeling like the weight of everything was pressing down on him. When he reached the counter, he sighed. "Just a small coffee today." The barista smiled gently. "It's already taken care of." Daniel looked up, surprised. "Again?" She nodded. "Someone came in earlier and left money with a note. They said, for the guy who keeps paying for others." Daniel's chest tightened. "Did they say who they were?" "Nope," she said. "But they smiled when they said it." Daniel stood there, silent. For weeks, he had been giving without expecting anything back. He didn't even think anyone noticed. But somehow, someone did. And they cared enough to return it. That night, Daniel sat in his small apartment, staring at the city lights through his window. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He realized something important. Kindness doesn't disappear. It travels. It moves from one person to another, like a quiet ripple in a vast ocean. You may never see where it goes. You may never know how far it reaches. But it always finds its way back, sometimes when you need it the most. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Daniel was walking home when he saw a man sitting on the sidewalk, holding a sign that read, "Just need a little help." Most people walked past him without a second glance. Daniel almost did too. He hesitated, his mind filled with the usual thoughts: what if he's not telling the truth? What if it doesn't make a difference? But then he remembered that first cup of coffee. And how it made him feel. So instead of walking away, Daniel sat down beside him. "Hey," he said softly. "Have you eaten today?" The man shook his head. "Come on," Daniel said, standing up. "Let's fix that." They walked into a nearby diner. Daniel ordered a warm meal for the man, and for a while, they just sat there, talking. The man's name was Robert. He had lost his job months ago, then his apartment. Life had unraveled faster than he could keep up. Daniel listened. Really listened. Not as someone trying to fix everything, but as someone who cared. Before they left, Daniel handed Robert a small card. It had the address of a local shelter and a phone number of a job resource center. "It's not much," Daniel said. "But it's a start." Robert looked at him with eyes full of gratitude. "You don't know what this means to me." Daniel smiled. "Actually, I think I do." Months passed. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The city felt warmer, brighter. And somehow, Daniel did too. His life wasn't perfect. Work was still stressful. Bills still piled up. But something inside him had changed. He no longer felt stuck. Because every time he felt overwhelmed, he remembered one simple truth. He could still make someone's day better. And that was enough. One afternoon, as Daniel walked past the same diner, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Inside, behind the counter, was Robert. Wearing a clean uniform. Smiling as he served customers. Daniel stepped inside, barely believing it. Robert looked up and his face lit up instantly. "Daniel." They shook hands, both smiling like old friends. "I got the job here," Robert said proudly. "Started a few weeks ago. I've been saving up, trying to get back on my feet." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "That's amazing." Robert nodded. "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't stopped that day." Daniel shook his head. "No, you did the hard part." Robert smiled. "Maybe. But you reminded me that someone still cared." As Daniel left the diner, he realized something powerful. Kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about small moments. A cup of coffee. A warm meal. A conversation. Simple things that say, "You matter." And sometimes, that's all a person needs to keep going. So the next time you're in a hurry, slow down. The next time you see someone struggling, don't look away. And the next time you have a chance to be kind, take it. Because you never know whose life you might change. And you never know when that kindness will find its way back to you.